Hey Nathan, decision day is coming up. Have you decided whether you're gonna, keep doing the podcast or not?
Yeah, sure. I've been thinking about it, of course, because this comes around once a year, whether, we're all going to stay or whether we want to just get on a raft and head out into the great blue yonder. And since I'm in charge, I mean, I don't know why I would leave. I'm going to stay.
Ah, okay. Well, I mean, I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but Luke, Steve, and I have been talking, and I'm afraid we're going to mutiny and force you to set sail.
If you guys are unhappy, why don't you leave?
Well, I mean, the three of us are happy. It's just we're not necessarily happy with you being in charge.
This is exactly why democracy is called tyranny of the masses. I hate democracy. Hello, and welcome to Woeful Wednesdays. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
We are reading through all of the books in a series of unfortunate events, and we're doing 3 videos for each book, and we release them once a week. So we split up each one into chapters 1 to 4, 5 to 8, and then 9 to 13. As you mentioned on the last podcast, this one, because it is the last book, we are on book the 13th, The End. Then we do have chapter 14 slash book 14. So for that one, we're going to save that for a whole separate podcast. So ultimately, there's going to be 40 podcasts with this. So we're going to talk about chapter 14 individually and then also do a final wrap up, some final thoughts on the series. So,
Yep.
yeah.
And yes, we should mention that you are reading this for the first time. I read this a couple times before, including as a middle grade reader. And this week, then we are reading The End, book the 13th, chapters 5 to 8.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we're in the middle chapters of this one.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and we do have a sponsor for this week. So,
Awesome.
our sponsor is BookCube Rafts. So, if you have been thinking about how to get around on any kind of water, whether it's, a whitewater river or a pond, a lake, the ocean, whatever, you're probably thinking the best way to do this is to be on a raft. But who wants to get an ordinary raft, like a yellow inflatable one or a wooden raft or something like that? You want to get a raft that is as inefficient as possible in cutting through the wind. That's why you want to turn to the experts at BookCube Rafts. Think a book is the square root of fun? Well, get ready to take the power of a book and cube it. BookCube Rafts, exponentially better than square rafts. I thought you would appreciate that. And the best
I
part
do.
is, if you ever encounter an old library, then your raft will just say, "We are the raft. We will assimilate you."
Yes, absolutely. Oh man.
That's how the
It's
Borg would
great.
travel if they're going to
Yep.
float around. They choose a cube for some unknown
Exactly.
reason. I guess space doesn't really have a lot of drag, so you could use any shape you want.
Yeah, I was talking to our mom about that recently, actually, about how in Star Trek, then it doesn't matter at all about um, aerodynamics or anything
Right.
because they build the ships in space, and the entire time they are in space.
Yeah.
There's no, there's nothing there. It is a void. It is a vacuum. So yeah, there's no need to cut through anything.
Yeah, exactly. But we think that a spaceship should look a certain way, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I guess the Borg is just like it doesn't matter, and they're just super pragmatic about it.
Right.
But anyway, book the 13th, chapters 5 to 8 is what we're going to get into. And please do go out and buy a BookCube raft as soon as possible. All right, folks, I
Absolutely.
hope you enjoy. Ignore the tattoo! Nathan unfortunately reads a series of unfortunate events at an unfortunate age, which in this case is being used to indicate that he is entirely too old to be reading this for the first time. All right, so we are talking about book the 13th, The End, chapters 5 to 8, and I have got plot summary duty for this week, which is challenging because there is not much to summarize.
Mhm.
So basically, the Baudelaires, they've been hanging out on the island for a few days. They get these menial tasks that really have nothing to do with their natural aptitudes. I'm pretty sure that Violet is helping with clothes. Is that right? She's doing laundry.
Yes, I
with the
believe so.
robes that they wear. I'm hoping that they have at least two pairs of robes a person, because
I
it
thought
really
the
seems
same thing.
strange. Because there's no mention of them having extra clothing, and I'm like, this can't possibly be that like everybody ends up naked while their robe is getting cleaned. They've got to have extra sets.
They
But
close. I mean, they clean the clothes. I think every day, is the way it was
yeah,
described. So yeah,
but
I
Ishmael
would
wants
hope.
to get rid of everything that's superfluous. So you
Mm,
would think that he would be like, you only have one body, so you only need one robe.
right.
I read it and I was very suspicious. I'm like, what is going on here? But anyway, so she's doing laundry, and Klaus, he is in charge of fetching things for Ishmael and fixing the clay, I guess. And
Yes.
then Sunny is in charge of gathering seaweed and raw fish. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Or no, she's helping with the meals. I know
Yeah.
that much. But it's like, yeah, it's really, really simple stuff. Like getting the seaweed and, drying it out. But she's not even doing that part of it. I think that she's just like assembling it on plates and bowls.
Okay. Yeah. And all right. So then they're hanging out. They've been there for a few days, and then they go out to like there's a storm that shows up and all of this, and then their job then is to then go and collect the detritus from the storm, all of this stuff that just washes ashore on the coastal shelf. So they head out to that, a whole bunch of them, and then there's the um, book of like the cube of books, and then on top
Yes.
of there's the leg, and it's Kit Snicket, and then they're like, oh wow, there she is, like we found her, I can't believe that she washed up, and it's like everything eventually turns up here. Okay, somehow it all turns up here, very much is feeling like Lost, like
Right. Yes.
you know what I mean, like how did you end up on the island, and it's just like
Yeah.
we all end up here, it's like are we dead? But anyway, so it's Kit Snicket, and then Olaf comes around. He's like, "Ha ha ha! I'm Olaf, and I'm in your vicinity. I've won." And th- that's basically it. But he's posing as a pregnant woman with seaweed for a wig,
Yes.
and then he's got the belly, which we later find out is the diving helmet that's got the medusoid mycelium mushroom inside it, the spores from it, and
Yep.
they ultimately bring out Ishmael. They bring him on the sled that they have, and he comes out because they realize that they can't push the cube of books to get Kit over towards him to make a decision about it. And because she's injured, and you're not supposed to move an injured person, even though she's not really moving if she's on top of it, but whatever.
Yeah.
And um, anyway, so he comes out and ultimately doesn't care for Olaf, doesn't care for Kit, and ends up leaving. And then the kids hang around. They're like, what are we going to do? Because he doesn't seem to like them anymore either. So
Right.
then it's like, what are we going to do? Are we going to stay here or what? And um, Olaf suggests that they join forces in order to get at this Ishmael character and
Mhm.
take over the island in some way, but they don't want to join up with Olaf. And then a bunch of other residents of the island show up and they're like, hey, we don't know how things are on this island, and we're planning a mutiny, and we're going to tell Ishmael that he's going to have to get on the raft and leave. And so then the Baudelaires then go to the Arboretum, the far side of the island, and they're going to go see what's going on over there to try to figure out what to do next. And that's basically what happens.
Yep. Yeah, and yeah, Ishmael had left them there because they wanted to hold on to, you
Right.
know,
Their
things that
personal.
yeah. And yeah, and also the incredibly deadly Viper is here,
Right.
who came along with Kit, um, introducing a serpent to this,
Yep.
paradise area.
Yes. This quasi Eden setting.
Yes. Yeah, and the children are going to the Arboretum to make weapons because, at least was my inference, that they don't want the other inhabitants to know about the medusoid mycelium and use that, um, because that would be disastrous.
Yep. All right. I guess into it. Do you want to go first with chapter 5?
Sure. Yeah, I've only got a couple notes here. The first is on page 95. Um, Toward the bottom of the page. Uh, oh man, where does a sentence even start? Okay, I guess more toward the middle of the page with the sentence, all day long, everyone in the world is succumbing to peer pressure, whether it is the pressure of their fourth grade peers to play dodgeball during recess or the pressure of their fellow circus performers to balance rubber balls on their noses. And if you try to avoid every instance of peer pressure, you will end up without any peers whatsoever. And the trick is to succumb to enough pressure that you do not drive your peers away, but not so much that you end up in a situation in which you are dead or otherwise uncomfortable. This is a difficult trick, and most people never master it and end up dead or uncomfortable at least once during their lives. Um, and yeah, I think that it is. It's a decent kind of advice here that he's presenting because it's true you can't just you know say no to every single thing uh, because some things then it's not actually bad. It's just,
That's true.
you should hang out with your friends, even if you don't particularly like soccer, for instance, but they all want to play soccer, then you shouldn't be like, no, I hate soccer. I'm not going to play with you because then if if that's what they like to do, then you're just not going to be spending time with them.
Yes. Yeah, that's a fair point. I've got the same passage marked because it's an interesting commentary that we have. It's on the one hand, I'm somewhat skeptical of this whole discussion because I don't. It's a very postmodern attitude, which essentially denies agency and autonomy over individuals, that says that everything is culturally informed, like, or influenced, that we are just essentially empty vessels and we become what we are through the culture in which we grow up,
Right.
and that you really don't have any say over your life because there's seen and unseen influences on you all the time. But it's he doesn't quite go that far, because I guess I'm saying, like, to me it partially denies a person's agency by saying if you do something then you're giving into peer pressure and you're experiencing peer pressure all the time. And then I'm like, it's not like that though. It's not constant.
Yeah.
um, Certainly when you're younger and when you're a teenager and even as an adult, if you're in the world of work or if you're retired or whatever, then yes, you're going to have peers. But um, I don't know. It's an interesting discussion that he gets into, and I think he
Yeah.
actually does a decent job of not overly simplifying it.
Yeah, I would agree. Because yeah, it is complicated and it is you shouldn't always give in to peer pressure,
Right.
but you shouldn't always turn down things that are that you're being pressured into. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
I mean, I guess it would be better if he just kind of explained. He says, like, if he had some kind of commentary about the fact that you can reject peer pressure entirely, but you probably won't really have peers then. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Like, you
Yeah.
won't really have friends or people who want to spend time with you. That um, life is a series of compromises in a lot of ways, and
Hmm.
the sooner that you learn how to be comfortable in situations in which you're not naturally comfortable, the the better off you're going to be, right? That
Yeah.
you basically have to find a way to make it fun for you. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
That's basically my point. And he doesn't really, it still stays a little too nihilistic for my taste,
Mm.
of basically just give in because you kind of should give in a lot of the time. And then I'm like,
Right.
but giving in doesn't mean that you're giving in to peer pressure. Sometimes it's just like, I'll do it because it makes you happy, but that's not me feeling pressured to do it.
Right.
It's that I genuinely want to make you happy, even if this doesn't particularly make me happy. To me, I wouldn't call that peer pressure. I would say that's compassion for other people, because you care for them, then
Mhm.
you want them to be happy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Um, yeah, and it is yeah, it's an interesting point.
It
Uh,
is.
yeah. All right, moving on to page 101. Just a quick note here when Sunny says geniceps, um,
Yeah.
then I looked that up and it is conjoined twins united at the thorax and skull and having two equal faces looking in opposite directions, um, which honestly sounds horrible. You would never be able to see your,
Huh.
um, your other half.
Has there ever been a case of genocides surviving?
I'm not sure. I see like a lot of images here, but I don't really want to look at, them too much,
All
as
right.
awful as that might sound. But
Yeah.
it's uh,
Sharing a skull, like, I don't know how, two babies who are born like that could possibly survive.
yeah,
Like, I know it's happened, but like not like that. It's happened where it's like they're both kind of facing the same direction and it's only slightly
right.
fused together.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, I know, and it's
So
just such a weird,
why did she say
choice.
that? I
She
don't
says that
even.
they are of two minds about living here. That's the
Okay.
explanation. And I know,
Okay.
I'm like, okay, that's it's a really awkward way of putting it, but okay. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
why you made that.
No, me neither. It's very much like that pained Michael Scott gif of just
Right.
"Ugh." That grimace. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
All right, so my next note is on page 102. Um, And this is when Sunny says, again, Sunny says diaspora. Sunny said
Diaspora.
diaspora. Sorry. I was going back and forth about which way I was supposed to pronounce it. Yeah, which means we live in such a distant place that the battle between VFD and their enemies seems very far away. But diaspora, uh, historically, or I guess literally refers to the dispersion of the Jews beyond Israel. This is according to the dictionary.
Mhm.
um, and so it's interesting that I mean we've seen this countless times of Sunny in particular using these words of Hebrew origin. Um,
Yes.
and yeah, it's interesting that she's using this to refer to them being, separated from VFD. Um, that it's, you know, portraying VFD uh,
Their
as
people group.
yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, and I don't know. It's just like really, it's another instance of just like, oh, you used that word, that works, but it's like I guess it just feels a bit extreme to me, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah, I mean, I was really interested in the usage of that word as well. I mean, I know that it was originally used to describe Jewish people, but now it's become a broader term where it just describes any ethnicity or any nationality living abroad, living elsewhere,
Right.
where these communities start forming and they're diasporic, or I guess it's diasporic communities. It's big in the like cultural studies and literary world. There's a lot of scholarly interest in diasporas, like ethnic diasporas and um, cultural diasporas that exist across the world. And I mean, I've never really explored it too deeply, but I definitely have had friends and enough professors who have been interested in it that I've heard enough about it. And it's just basically what happens to a people group when they're living really far from their home nation.
Right.
or their home culture. And it's basically an examination of what customs and practices remain and which ones kind of go away.
Mm.
And that's kind of the interesting thing. So let's say if you're looking at, you can, like, Jewish people obviously is like where, like, it's Hebrew, it comes from, like, it was originally referring to Jewish people, because Jewish people in particular, and this is one reason why they've been as um, persecuted as they have been throughout all of history, essentially, it's because they don't relinquish their Jewish identity. They continue to
Right.
speak Hebrew. They do not convert to a local religion. They typically they don't marry outside of their own ethnic group and all of that stuff. So they maintain a Jewish identity even without living within a majority Jewish population, right? That, and
Hmm.
so, like, that's how I've always understood it, at least, is that's a big reason for the persecution of Jewish people, of anti-Semitism. It comes from that. It's that they won't assimilate,
Mm.
right? And
Right.
that's not a bad thing. It's just that, like,
Yeah.
not whatsoever, like, not at all. It's just that most people do give up their language, a lot of their culture, oftentimes their religion, after generations of living away from their home nation,
Hmm.
right? That it's just, it happens that if you're living in, the United States or Canada, then you see that. I mean, because obviously both you and I growing up in Toronto, that we know, because Toronto is such a multicultural city, first and second and third generation Canadians where their parents or their grandparents came from abroad, and you see how the language just doesn't quite, pass on from one generation to the next. That it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, my parents speak it, I speak it a little bit, but not that much. Oh yeah, we do this, like, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's Chinese New Year and it's important to my family, but then they'll celebrate our New Year,
Yeah.
right? But then if they were in China, they wouldn't necessarily, right? At least not to the same degree. And it's like they start watching, like, hockey, and then it's like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But their grandparents are not going to watch hockey. Do you see what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
interesting of what stays and what goes, and that's basically what uh, like diasporas are, or diasporas are, but diasporas is what it's focused on as a particular study.
Mm.
It's And so I'm just saying that, like, it's just, you can do that with pretty much any ethnicity, and it's a really interesting um like field of research, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know much beyond that, because I'm sure there's intricacies to the entire field. I don't really know much beyond that, other than that's what it's a study of. So
Right.
when it shows up in the book, I'm like, so are you guys saying, like, how much is it, like, essentially a comment on how much of this VFD struggle should we bring with us to the island, and how much of it should we just abandon?
Right.
Makes sense. That to me is why Sonny's invoking this term. It's really Handler, I think, more so than Snicket in this case, who's invoking this term, saying, well, do we want to keep thinking about the schism? Do we want to keep thinking about the great schism within VFD? Do we want to bring all of that with us? And even what we learned from our parents and all of that, because that's their people group, more or less.
Yeah.
Or do we just want to assimilate and become just like the people on this island? And that um, diasporas are, like, diaspora communities are not necessary. It's not really, as far as I understand, and not, by no means am I an expert on it. It's not so much a criticism, like a critique or a judgment on, certain people groups and what stays and what goes. It's not so much, oh, they're failing as Koreans, or they're failing as, like, like Indian people or Sri Lankans or whatever, right? Like, it's not so much that. It's just, it's more the study of how it changes and what remains the same.
Mm.
And
Okay.
they're definitely being asked to abandon everything
Yeah.
to be part of this community. And so that's kind of it. It's much more of assimilate, become exactly like us, think the way we think, dress the way we dress. In, like, Canada and in Toronto in particular, but a lot of cities across Canada is very, very pluralistic, where if you walk around Toronto, then you know that people continue to wear a lot of the clothing that is particular to their home country, and people don't really think anything of it because
Yep.
you just see it all day long. And if you are born into that and grow up with that, then like you don't even blink when you see it.
Yep.
But you can imagine that like if you're in some places where there are not ethnic minorities, where it's, let's say, predominantly white and they don't have a lot of people from, various nations around the world, then there's a lot more peer pressure to assimilate because you're
Right.
going to stand out a lot more. So I don't. It's just that one word that brings up all these interesting implications. It's dress the way we dress. Don't bring your clothing from where you came from. Don't bring that clothing to the island,
Yeah.
and don't bring any of that stuff to the island. And that is much more of an assimilationist approach to a community than a pluralistic approach, which is just saying we're all kind of different and that's okay because we've got enough stuff in common that we all get along.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I know it is. It's such an interesting, discussion. Like we could, analyze the whole journey of the Baudelaires based on this one word,
Yeah,
essentially,
yeah,
um, of them, being passed around from guardian to guardian, essentially going from,
yeah,
country to country,
yes.
and how much of, of their traditions, their history do they hold on to? What do they give up? How have
And
they
that they've
tried to assimilate?
lost so much of it because they don't know who their parents are
Right.
anymore. Like they don't
Yeah.
have this and like they're learning, oh, our parents were part of VFD, but they didn't even realize that when they were children. They can't ask their parents that because that's a
Yeah.
big part of diasporic studies is, let's say, I mean, like if you're looking at Jewish people and certainly a lot of European Jews, where sometimes it was only like one or two family members who survived the Holocaust. And then, they come over to, let's say, the United States, for instance, and then it's like, well, you've lost a lot of your family history.
Right.
So what do you even do when you maybe want to continue to carry on family traditions or ethnic or religious traditions, but you've just lost so much of it? Um,
Hmm. Yeah, and this sort of is a broader discussion, I think, for this book as well. We had talked, on the last episode about how much, Christian imagery there was.
with chapter 4, that illustration that you have at the very beginning of chapter 4.
Yeah, and so to think of the Baudelaires arriving on this place, described as diaspora,
Hmm.
um, where they are surrounded by all this, Christian imagery.
Yeah.
Let's say that it's portraying the island as a, you know, as a Christian environment without actually
Yeah.
invoking those names.
Yeah.
Um, in that, they are having to live amongst these things and still trying to hold on to their own identity, their
Yeah.
own, let's say, Jewish heritage, because it certainly seems like that is their heritage, even though it hasn't been really described as that. And in this
Right.
case, then it's their VFD identity.
Yeah, but then there's this slippage where it starts turning into a Jewish identity because then, and I guess I might as well, because this relates to the conversation. So this is jumping ahead to, I think it's chapter 7, but it goes from page 156 over to 157.
Mhm.
Um, so towards the bottom of 156, then um, Violet is talking to Olaf, who's threatening them with he'll release the Medusoid mycelium, and if you let me out, I can threaten the entire colony with these deadly mushrooms. All those robed fools will be my slaves. What if they refuse? Violet asked. Then I'll smash the helmet open. Olaf crowed, and this whole island will be destroyed. But we'll be destroyed too, Klaus said. The spores will infect us the same as everyone else. Yom HaShoah, Sonny said, which meant never again, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
Like that's the Jewish term. I believe I looked it up, and Hashoah means whirlwind, is what.
Okay.
And so anyway, but it effectively comes out to, at least in English, and we refer to Yom HaShoah as Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is, let's remember this so that way it never happens again. Let's not forget what has happened to our people,
Yeah.
like for Jewish people, and then for everybody else in the world, let's not forget what happened to Jewish people. So that way, we never see this kind of genocide happen ever again.
Mm.
And there's of course been genocide since then, but
Right.
it's definitely Sonny again is using a Hebrew word here.
Hmm.
Sonny does it. I've said it before, where I don't know how much Violet and Klaus are Jewish, but Sonny sure seems to be Jewish.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is just funny how it's. I mean, it's. I think in part just because of like function, because she's just babbling, that you can
Right.
get her to say things that actually are Hebrew words, whereas it would make no sense for Violet or Klaus to say that
Yeah.
because they just speak. But Sunny just says like gibberish, but then sometimes it's not gibberish.
Hmm. Um, yeah, and on that note, then I think that it's interesting because, of course, by that then she means never again. Um, and if we're thinking of VFD as a stand-in for Jewish people, then like the members of VFD being
Yeah,
Jewish
yeah.
people, then the Hotel Denouement fire would be um, I
The
guess what she
Holocaust.
yeah, this eruption of fire that engulfs all these people and takes away a huge percentage
Uh,
of the population.
it makes sense because part of the problem with like part of where the issues with the Holocaust came from is like, when it was happening as the Nazi party took over Germany, there's no safe place left, right?
Yeah,
That Jewish ghettos and all of that, that they were just going into Jewish communities and then saying you have to stay within this particular part of the city, and then they couldn't stay in that particular part of the city. Then they get on trains and they go off to concentration camps. There just was no safe place left, and that's what's been happening with VFD.
yeah,
And part of that is because they did at the time did not have their nation state of Israel, right?
right,
Because they had been living scattered across the world, and so they just didn't have a safe place to go and practice their religion free of persecution. That Jewish people have been seeking a safe place for a couple thousand years.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so it's yeah, you're right that like you can really read a lot into the entire series just from that comment, and then saying, so if this is supposed to be in some ways an allegory for Jewish people and like the diaspora of the Jewish people, and the Baudelaires are stand-ins for them, and how much do you assimilate, and how much do you think back on your family's history, on your real history with VFD slash Judaism.
hmm
Like,
even the element of being well read as a important
mhm,
characteristic, certainly
mhm,
being well read in religious texts, uh,
yes,
is important to Jewish heritage, Jewish culture.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Hmm. It's
Did I
interesting.
tell you that this kept stayed interesting or what?
Yeah, no, like that to me, that's the most interesting word in the entire series.
Right. Yeah.
Right there, where it opens up all of these interpretive possibilities that really didn't seem possible before.
Right.
That at
Yeah.
least I didn't recognize, but now that I'm catching it, and now there's enough evidence in the text, in this particular text, that it informs the other books.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Did you have any other notes for chapter 5?
That was it.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead with chapter 6 then?
Sure. On page 120, I've only got one note here, and this is a very strange moment where I'll just read from the top of the page. It says, "Stop," Klaus said. "It's not safe to move someone who may be seriously injured, particularly if she's pregnant." "Klaus is right," said Dr. Kurtz. "I remember that from my days in veterinary school. If Muhammad will not come to the mountain," Rabbi Blig said. Blig, maybe? What do you think, Blig? Anyway,
Yeah.
Rabbi Bly said, using an expression that the islanders understood at once, "The mountain will come to Muhammad." So again, like that full thing there is, if Muhammad will not come to the mountain will come to Muhammad, which I'm not quite sure that that's how it goes.
No,
Um,
that's the inversion of how it
yeah,
should
he's got it
be.
reversed. And
Yeah.
that's Francis Bacon who said that, who was a Renaissance philosopher, writer, thinker.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't know much about Bacon. I mean, I know little bits and pieces. I know that he's significant, but I'm not great with like 15th, 16th century European history. I'm okay, but I'm pretty good from like the Enlightenment on.
Mm.
Anyway,
Yeah. But yeah, it is a very interesting moment because it is the rabbi who is
yeah. Why is the rabbi
invoking.
talking about the Prophet Muhammad? Um, and
Yeah.
it's weird because that's not from the Quran. That's not an Islamic expression.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
right.
yeah. So that's what I'm saying is like it's referring to the Prophet Muhammad, but it's
Hmm.
not an Islamic expression.
Yeah.
It's an English expression. So
Yes.
it's but it's so weird that the rabbi would invoke this expression referring to Muhammad.
So if we look at it again, it says, that an expression that the islanders understood at once, almost implying that the islanders are maybe not Christian, but that they are Muslim or
I
Islamic.
don't I don't know. I mean, maybe you can get that reading. I did look it up though, because it's Francis Bacon who says it. Like I say, it's not
Hmm.
in the Quran and it's not Muslims who
Yeah,
use that expression.
right.
So I don't know enough context of why or how Bacon came up with that expression.
Yeah, I guess all I'm saying is the fact that the rabbi is using it, knowing that the islanders will understand it, is, taking again diaspora into account, that he
Yes.
has, given up on his Jewish heritage, essentially.
He
Um,
is certainly assimilating enough that he's able to
mhm,
speak their language, including their phrases,
right.
right? Using their expressions instead of using a Jewish expression, whether it be Hebrew or Yiddish. You know what I mean? Instead of using something that Jewish people would recognize, then instead he's using theirs.
Hmm.
And it absolutely is another example of this being a diasporic community.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, did you have any? You said that that was your only note for chapter 6?
Yeah.
All right. I had a couple more here on page 126. Um, then um, this is when Violet is asking Friday if she knows how to read, and Friday is explaining all this. Yes, she said, Ishmael didn't think it was a good idea to teach us, but Professor Fletcher disagreed and held secret classes on the coastal shelf for those of us who were born on the island. From time to time, I keep in practice by sketching the alphabet in the sand with a stick, but without a library, there's not much I can do. I hope Ishmael won't suggest that we let the sheep drag all these books to the arboretum. Um, and then, again, it's this whole discussion of, he won't force you. Um, but yeah, it's the first interesting, or it's the first instance that we get of, clearly people on the island are not happy with Ishmael having taken over.
Hmm.
Um, and which is something that obviously keeps going as we go further. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I think that was my only note about that. It's just that it's like, oh, she learned to read from Professor Fletcher, even though she's never seen a book. Um, and it also is just, the way that Violet phrases it is, I don't know, it's so harsh, or at least I read it as being so harsh. You've never seen a book, Violet said in amazement. Do you know how to read? Like it,
Right, right.
it just sounds so accusatory. It's like, oh, what? You don't even know how to read then, do you? Oh, you're pathetic. Like I'm like, that's really harsh. Like, how would she have
Yeah,
seen a book? She was born on the island and everything. Just give her a break.
agreed. Yes, that is, yeah, that's a good point. Hmm.
All right, and then on page, let me double check, 138. Um, this is uh, yeah, this is when the incredibly deadly Viper comes back. Um, and I guess the Viper can swim. Uh, but yeah, the discussion about there being a serpent on this island now, which I had alluded to
Uh-huh.
earlier. Um, yeah, so it is introducing a serpent to, this paradise, this Eden-like island. Um, and yeah, we haven't gotten a ton of it yet, but there's a lot going on there. Like the fact that he has introduced this serpent, it brought to mind not just the story of Adam and Eve, but specifically um, Paradise Lost.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure. Have you read Paradise Lost? I have
Um,
not. So
okay. No, it just shows as much as we talk, how much we don't talk. Not only have I read Paradise Lost, I took an entire graduate course just
okay,
entirely on Paradise Lost, and that was
gotcha,
only a few years ago. I know Paradise Lost really well, really
gotcha.
well. That it's like
I
it's of
figured that
like
you
the
did, but
yeah, well, I mean, like, to be fair, there's a lot of really significant literary texts that I have never read, that I've only got a passing, like a cursory understanding of, and I've only read little excerpts here and there. But it's just of all of like the significant pieces of English literature, then that's one of the ones that I know the maybe the best, aside from a few Shakespeare plays.
okay. All right. Um, yeah, I don't know what you have to say about the serpent appearing here, if anything. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's pretty, apparent that it's introducing this serpent to this paradise
Yeah.
as this menacing thing, but that it is not actually a dangerous creature here.
Hmm.
That it is a
Yeah.
friendly creature, that it is, helpful. And yeah, I don't know. Did you want to say anything specific with that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have to get into my notes then for chapter 7,
Okay.
which I don't have any notes for chapter 8, but my notes for chapter 7 focus on that.
Okay.
So on page 151, towards the bottom of that, then this is when there's the whole discussion of whether they should join forces with Count Olaf.
Hmm.
And so it says, towards the bottom, Count Olaf says, I'm no worse than anyone else. Count Olaf said, Ishmael is just as treacherous as I am. Faustiand, or Faustiand, but I believe it's supposed to be Faustiand, Sonny said. True, Olaf insisted, although he probably did not understand what Sonny had said. So I don't know if you caught that, of like what it means, like that's supposed to be Faustian.
Mm. Uh, well, like that is uh, sorry, that is a word that she says.
Yeah, but do you read it? Like, did you get a different definition? Like, because I'm assuming that she's referring to Faust.
Okay. Let me double check because I don't think that no, I didn't keep it. Um, but yeah, I think it did have a different uh, definition. Sorry, this is um, okay. I don't.
Base.
I'm not seeing it here. So yeah,
Okay.
just go ahead.
Um, so basically, it's a he's a historical figure, German historical figure from the 15th century, 16th century, and Faust is the legend is that he made a deal with the devil. And so
Right.
there's been the play Faust and then various iterations of Faust, but like people will say Faustian as in a deal with the devil. And so you've got Olaf saying that Ishmael is no more treacherous, or he's just as treacherous as I am. That join up with me because everybody is treacherous just like me. The world is just full of treacherous people. But it's basically it's tempting them as this deal with the devil. That Olaf is very much in terms of the story of Eden. He is very much Satan or the serpent tempting the children,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
because in the story in Genesis, and then certainly with what Milton does in Paradise Lost, then the way that like basically Satan's great power or the serpent's great power, but like at least in Paradise Lost, and it's a given that it is Satan who's speaking. His great power is rhetoric,
Yes. Yeah,
right?
which is referenced in this as well.
Yeah. So he's constant like Olaf is a pretty good stand-in for that, but at least to some degree. But you've got that little reference there of Sonny saying Faustian, right? And then on
Mhm.
page 159,
Which I did look it up, and apparently that is a type of cotton.
what
Uh,
is?
uh, fustian?
Okay,
Faustian?
so maybe it's not Faust. It honestly might not be, but I
Yeah.
feel like it's supposed to be read as Faustian because it's definitely him saying, you should join with me, which would be very much making a deal with the devil.
Right. Yeah, because it says it is a kind of coarse, twilled cotton or cotton and linen stuff,
Hmm. Because it's
which,
not spelled like Faust. It doesn't have the A, so it's
mhm.
Faustian instead of Faustian. But I don't know. I could be wrong. It might not be that he's making a reference to that, but it just seems so significant.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and then on page 159, the first main paragraph on that page, then it says, this is Olaf speaking again. I could tell you stories about, Count Olaf said in a muffled wheeze. I could tell you secrets about people and places that you'd never dream of. I could tell you about arguments and schisms that started before you were born. I could even tell you things about yourselves that you could never imagine. Just open the door of my cage, orphans, and I'll tell you things that you could never discover on your own. So he is tempting them with knowledge, right? And then if you go back to Eden, then you've got the knowledge, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And
Mhm.
so the essentially that is the premise behind it. It's that your eat and your eyes shall be opened, right? That like you'll
Right.
know things that only God can know. And he's saying, I have all of this knowledge and I'm offering it to you, and it's a temptation.
Yeah.
So it's definitely still riffing on these um, themes that you get in the Garden of Eden from the book of Genesis, but it's not like basically Olaf is the serpent. He's playing the role of the
Right.
serpent here.
Yeah.
And he's saying you can't trust that guy over there because he's keeping things from you, right? That
Yeah.
you even have the core of the apple that drops out of
Mhm.
Ishmael's robe. And so it's basically, well, God can eat from the tree. God can have knowledge of good and evil, but you can't have knowledge of good and evil,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That so he's trying to turn them against Ishmael. But I guess my issue is I don't know how much. I said it before when we were talking on the last podcast, and it was after we finished recording. Then I just said that I just don't have enough faith that Handler is going to be able to competently play with biblical themes, because there's been no evidence that he's got a sophisticated or even a competent understanding of the Bible, and that it's concerning. So I guess I'm wondering where it's going. He's definitely riffing on these themes that show
Mhm.
up there, but to what effect, it's unclear right now.
Yeah.
And that, like, basically I'm saying, like, okay, these are really, really interesting themes,
Hmm.
but do you know enough to follow through in a way that is not embarrassing?
Right. Yeah. From what I remember, I think moderately. That's
Okay, I'll
that's
take that.
yeah. I don't think that it, is perfect or great, but I think that he does do some interesting stuff with it. So,
Okay.
yeah. But yeah, no, and I had, the same parts marked, especially with the Apple core. And yeah, clearly, it's supposed to be, about like God already, having the knowledge of good and evil, and, Ishmael being this, you know, God figure on the island of withholding things from them. And, oh, no, 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 you can't take part in the, eating of the apple. It's just for me.
Hmm.
And yeah, all of that temptation.
I guess I'm saying, like, I get that he's riffing on these themes, but like I say, I don't know to what effect,
Right.
because setting up, unless this Ishmael character is supposed to be something other than a con man, it sure seems like he's just a con man.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That, and Olaf is a con man, and I guess my point is, I don't really like the idea of just getting human con men to be stand-ins for the ultimate battle, the biblical battle of good and evil, which goes from before time even existed until after time no longer exists. To it is
Right.
it's like taking like a grain of sand from the beach and then saying this is the size of the universe. It doesn't even make sense to try to say that these guys can be stand-ins. Um,
Mhm.
that's where I'm saying, like, I don't know that he is going to be able to pull this off. Um,
Right.
that it, anyway, it's fine. I guess I'm just saying that, you know what I mean. I'm looking at this and I'm going, of all the allegories, you're going to say that this guy represents God and this guy represents Satan. Well, unless you understand exactly who God is according to the biblical description of him, who Satan is, through understanding, theology, which is incredibly um, expansive, right? I mean, you're
Yeah.
talking about a couple thousand years of human knowledge put towards understanding, the Bible. Then, like, okay, good luck.
Right. Um, yeah. All right. Well, that does knock out quite a few of my notes as well, I think. So if I get to those, then we might have to be like, oh, we already covered that.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, so my last note for chapter 6 is on page 140, and this is when Sonny, again, says Dreyfus, um, which meant, what precisely are you accusing us of? And this is a reference to the Dreyfus Affair, which uh, was a political scandal. This is according to Wikipedia, that divided the Third French Republic, um, and it has come to symbolize in the Francophone world, and it remains one of the most notable examples of a complex miscarriage of justice and anti-Semitism. The role played by the press and public opinion proved influential in the conflict. And I think that is a really interesting thing to introduce here, because that is essentially um, what the whole series seems to be focusing on. Um, is public opinion versus versus the press, and like how both can be deceitful. um, the miscarriage of justice, with the judges being villainous people,
Mm.
uh,
Yes,
and then
yeah.
and then also even anti-Semitism, which
Hmm.
is kind of what's going on in this book. Not exactly, but it's
Yeah.
being addressed. So
No,
yeah.
that's really interesting. Like that's crazy interesting because then beyond that, it's not only that because I'm reading up as you're speaking here, and so it's Alfred Dreyfus who's convicted of treason, and he was an Alsatian French artillery officer of Jewish descent. That it's interesting that you know being French, but he's of Jewish descent. They're the
Mm,
Baudelaires, French last name.
right. Yeah.
So there's extra significance there of them being secretly Jewish, but they've got a French last name as represented by the diaspora, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I, it is making me wonder now, like how much intention there's been all along
Hmm.
by Handler.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. It's really interesting because we do get things like talking about Klaus's bar mitzvah, I believe. Um, and yet, now that he's, on, moving from place to place and all this, then they're not really able to, uh, you know, uh, practice their faith. And then
I don't.
even,
Do we ever get a reference to him having a bar mitzvah?
oh, it
There's a
possibly
reference
skips.
to a bat mitzvah, but I
Oh,
don't
that's
believe
right.
that it's one of the Baudelaires.
Okay. All right. Um, yeah. Well, anyway, regardless, there is like a lot of interesting stuff being introduced in this book that, yeah, it does. I think this might be one of the main reasons why people say that the series is so rewarding to reread, because once you have, all
Yeah.
this knowledge from later on, then it influences the way that you read it, from there on out.
Yeah, I'm surprised because there's so much stuff that does not seem to have any intention behind it whatsoever. And
Right.
so then to see like these carefully hidden references, um, and that it comes together in book the 13th, I'm wondering how much of that is, are you just kind of putting a whole bunch of stuff into book 13 that then retroactively makes us reconsider stuff that we read earlier, even if there was no intention of reading some of that stuff into it earlier, right? That just
Right.
going like, oh, this could work as an allegory for Jewish people post Holocaust. Like,
Right. Yeah.
but it does. Like, it really does work. I
Yeah.
I'm surprised how well it works actually.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Um, yeah. So those were my notes for chapter 6. Um, and did you have any other notes for chapter 7?
No,
Nor 8, correct?
correct.
All right. So my next note then is on page 158. This has been Sunny again, says Boswell, um, which it's just kind of a funny reference that she says here. Sunny, sorry, Boswell. Sunny said she meant something along the lines of "Your life doesn't interest me," um, and James Boswell was a Scottish biographer, diarist, and lawyer born in Edinburgh. He is best known for his biography of his friend and older contemporary, the English writer Samuel Johnson, um, which is commonly said to be the greatest biography written in the English language. Um, A great mass of his diaries, letters, and private papers were recovered from the 1920s to the 1950s, and her ongoing publication has transformed his reputation.
Mm.
That's all according to Wikipedia. Um, but I think it is an important influence to Handler in writing, this series. We're at least in coming up with the character of Lemony Snicket, where we have multiple, spin-offs from the main series or tangentially related works, such as the Beatrice letters and the unauthorized autobiography,
Hmm.
both of which are essentially a collection of letters and are focusing on diary entries and things of that nature. Um, so it's interesting because I think that this might not have like James Boswell was maybe not so much of an influence on the actual series, but on fleshing out Lemony Snicket after the fact, which is what Boswell did with his friend Samuel Johnson.
Perhaps. Yeah, you could be right in that the epistolary novel was very popular at various points in literary history. And I feel like that's got more of an influence than Boswell, where he's doing actual biography.
Mm,
But the epistolary novel is telling a story through a series of letters and diary entries,
right.
right? That
Yeah.
what Handler is doing is fiction, and then what Boswell was doing is nonfiction, and they're not exactly the same thing by saying the epistolary novel is influenced by biography. I mean, you know, perhaps to some degree it's trying to imitate the form of it, and but I don't know. Like I'm saying that you could be right, but I feel like without actually hearing from Handler himself, then I don't know. It definitely is one
Mm,
of these things of saying, I'm not interested in you. Like I wouldn't write a biography about you. You're not worthy
right.
of a biography, is the way Sonny says it. And then
Yes.
beyond that, to then say, invoking the name of Boswell, then references the fact that Handler likes biography. Then I'm like, I don't see evidence that he likes biography necessarily, but he likes the epistolary form.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
That's all that I'm saying. But it could be that he genuinely does really enjoy biography, which is why he's now like why he starts writing epistolary stuff like the unauthorized biography and et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And it could be both. It could be both that he's interested in both the epistolary form and Boswell and biography. But yeah, anyway, but that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, for sure. All right. On page 161, just toward the bottom of the page, um, occasionally they took sips of coconut cordial from the seashells that hung from their waists, hoping that the strong, strange drink would distract them from the strong, strange thoughts in their heads. This is terrible advice.
Isn't that the advice that every drunk like or believes? You know what I mean?
Yes.
That it's like, oh no, I have strong, strange thoughts in my head, so I will drink this strong, strange drink to distract me from them.
Yeah,
Right?
just get drunk and then you'll feel better about your life. And it's like, ah,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people do that.
yeah,
But no, you're right. It's genuinely not very good advice.
yeah,
Certainly
uh,
not for children.
right, yep. Um, all right, and I guess next up, on page 158, then there is, uh, Count Olaf. Do you think your pathetic history is the only story in the world? Do you think this island has just sat here in the sea, waiting for you to wash up on its shores? Do you think I just sat in my home in the city, waiting for for you miserable orphans to stumble into my path? And then on page 168, um, then toward the top of the page, it says, this is Kit speaking, countless schisms have divided the world over the years. Kit replied in the darkness, do you think the history of VFD is the only story in the world? But let's not talk of the past, Baudelaires. Tell me how you made your way to these shores. And so, yeah, it's these multiple instances of, just reminding the children about that there are so many different stories that are all happening at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, that they are not the center of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
despite everything seemingly revolving around them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which I think is a really interesting thing to put into the final book of a series focused on these characters.
Yeah, certainly as a commentary on, like, if it's an allegory for Jewish people and the diaspora of Jewish people,
Hmm.
particularly post-Holocaust, then I mean that section that you just read on page 168, where Kit is speaking and she says, "Tell me how you made your way to these shores, the same way you did." Violet said, "We were castaways. The only way we could leave the Hotel Denouement was by boat." And there's a lot of Jewish people who were refugees in World War II who fled Europe by boat. And
Right.
there's of course the most famous case of, and it's terrible that I can't remember the name of the ship, but it was turned away in the U.S. They were at the
Right.
port of Miami, and then they ended up back in France, I believe, and then captured, and many of them died in the Holocaust, right?
Yeah.
But there was a lot of Jewish refugees who were just trying to escape any way they could, and just this idea that there's a lot of them all over, and they've all been scattered, and they're all fleeing for their lives, and it is all misery. And so it kind of makes sense then with these books being focused on these, series of unfortunate events, because in a lot of ways, if you're looking at Jewish history, then you can say it's just a series of unfortunate events. And I'm
Right.
not trying to belittle it by any means, but I'm saying it's just like, it doesn't basically pick a year, pick a country, you're going to see persecution of the Jews.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism has existed essentially everywhere, ever since the Jewish people, you know, like formed a civilization,
Right.
became their own people group. And there's always been persecution of the Jews. And
Yeah.
so uh, that it's really interesting. Um, I wish he signaled more to this before Book the 13th, but I also
Yeah.
appreciate the fact that, as you say, rereading the series is rewarding because, in light of this, it does change how you view things.
Yeah.
I don't know what it does. Like, if I mean, and I think it'll probably be more the next part that we talk about this, and then, like chapters 9 to 13, and then 14, which I have not read yet, and then in our wrap up discussion. But I'm like, I don't know, like, what you make of Olaf in all of this.
Right. Yeah. um, um, Yeah, my only other note there is, again, on page 168, with it talking about, the only way we could leave the Hotel Denouement was by boat. And as you mentioned, that's how many Jewish people, fled the Holocaust. We had mentioned before, you were, kind of surprised by the fact that the Hotel Denouement was not the end, that it
Right.
wasn't the end of the
Mm-hmm.
series, um, but it was, kind of the climax.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can, I think there is definitely a reading in here of things building and building and building toward the Hotel Denouement, which would be the Holocaust, the climax
Mm-hmm.
of all of this. Um, and then, the way that they escaped from that, and that being where, you even have the trials, which is,
Mm-hmm.
I would have to like really think about like how that works, but I think that there could be something there as well, trying to determine who was villainous and who was noble during these troubling times, post schism. Um, yeah,
Yeah, you're saying that it's representative, that it's allegorical for the Nuremberg trials.
potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's weird that it's happening before the Holocaust.
Right.
If the burning of the hotel. That's where I'm saying that it's like that my concern, I'm looking at this going, ooh, is this brilliant? Or is this him just like throwing spaghetti at the wall and some stuff is now sticking? Right?
Right.
That's my thing with these books is
Yeah.
that, and that's what people say about postmodern art and postmodern literature and film. Then they say it, people will find really deep, profound, significant themes and concepts in them, but then there's a lot of nonsense in there as well. And then it's like, ooh, look at how deep it is. And it's like, well, was that even intentional, or did they just throw as many allusions as they possibly could? And then some people found some profundity in there, and then say there was intention all along and it's really profound. And other people are saying it's accidental profundity, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying is like, I don't know that, and I mean, of course, all allegory falls apart when you look too carefully at it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, because even like Olaf now being with them on this island, that I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, there were a lot of Nazis who escaped after World War II as well. Like a lot
Hmm.
of them ended up in Argentina, um,
Mm.
in
Right.
particular. But so I'm like, is that what's going on here?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It is something that I am sure people have, like, I feel like people have definitely already pulled these books apart from that vantage point.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure.
So yeah, there's no sense in us trying to, as we're going through, pull apart all these things. But
No, I
yeah.
mean, I'm not trying to do a comprehensive look at it, but I'm just
Hmm.
saying, as somebody who's reading it for the first time, and this is my reaction to it, and I'm
Right.
looking at this and going, well, okay, this is interesting. You're definitely doing interesting stuff. However, I I'm still unsure of how well this all fits together.
Right.
That it seems like it's coming together in my head as I'm
Hmm.
going through this, but there's definitely some wrinkles in this.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, my last note is on page 176, and I'm hoping that you maybe have a little bit of extra insight into this. The reference to the Cimmerians. I know that some will probably pronounce it Cimmerians, but uh,
I wish I did, but I honestly don't. So,
okay. Yeah. The only reason why I had hoped that you would is because the I guess they were first referenced in the Odyssey, um,
okay.
and which I have not read. um, but yeah, there is also a poem of the Chimeria, sorry, titled Chimeria, which is the place is described as a land of darkness and deep night. Um, there's some interesting, you know, readings that people have done where it seems to be potentially referencing uh, the Celts, Celtic people,
Okay.
um, and yeah, so I don't know, about that, but this idea of the Cimmerians just, being doing deceitful things at night, and I'm like, who are you referring to here?
Right. Um, yeah, no, I wish that I had more insight into this, but I really don't. My knowledge of classics of ancient history is not great. It's not terrible compared to the average person. I know more than the average person, but I certainly don't know much in comparison to somebody who majored in it, or somebody who's an actual scholar in the field. So, I mean, in comparison to that, I know essentially nothing. But um, I do know that there's a whole bunch of different people groups from the ancient world. If we're talking about, before the Common Era, right, BCE, or before
Right.
Christ, if you want to use the older distinction, then there's a whole bunch of people groups who get described in pretty awful ways. And I think the
Gotcha.
thing is that, but I think the point though is that there's no, as far as we can tell, like nobody identifies as that anymore. So no, there are no descendants of that.
Right.
particular group. So it's kind of not offensive because you're not offending anybody who has existed for thousands of years. Do you know what I mean? That
Right.
if
Yeah.
you so it's not a great description, but if people didn't have a great feeling about that particular society in the ancient world, then nobody can really contradict their accounts,
Right.
right? And if they're the ones who write the history, then we only have got one account to go on then.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, and I don't know much beyond them because they certainly do not get described in a favorable light by any means.
Mm-mm. Yeah. Um, yeah. All right. Well, I was hoping that you would have some insight there,
I
but
wish I did. I really
yeah.
do wish I did, but I failed at least there. I feel like I've come through on most of them, but that one, I got nothing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. All right, and that was my last note for this set of chapters.
Okay. Well, I'm interested in continuing on. I mean, I feel like I wonder about I was before we had this discussion that I was disappointed with the same old discussion of like Kit is saying, "Hey, you can't do something treacherous. You can't engage scrutiny," and they're like, "Well, what are we supposed to do?" And it's like this whole idea of this binary worldview. You're either noble or you are villainous, and she's cautioning them not to be villainous. Then I wonder, like, it falls so flat for me. But I wonder if that's supposed to be something like, hey, we can't be like the Nazis. We can't respond to violence with violence just because we're getting oppressed. But even if that's the case, like, that's absurd. Like I said before, I mean, I know I've brought this up before on the
Yeah,
podcast of if you say, well, the Nazis use weapons and violence, and therefore that becomes evil. So we won't use weapons or violence against the Nazis. Just let them do whatever they want because they're evil people, but we'll be good people. Then it's like, no, when you shoot a Nazi, that's not the same thing as a Nazi killing an innocent Jewish person, right? It's not killing is killing. It's there is a just form of killing and there is an unjust, evil form of killing.
right.
Do you know what I mean? Like if you're
Yeah, yeah,
stopping
yeah.
the Nazis from committing like the Holocaust, committing genocide against like Jewish people amongst others, amongst millions of other people beyond Jewish people. Like if like the Allies were not evil for doing that. They were not like the Nazis for doing that. So
Right.
I'm saying I don't like this distinction that constantly seems to be being made within the series.
Yeah, I guess how I'm, looking at it now is trying to think of what would have been happening specifically in Germany, just before the Holocaust with, uh, all these um, gross depictions of Jewish people and all that, and
Yeah.
how, Jewish people perhaps were, thinking like, well, we can't do, the same thing back to them. We don't want to vilify them just for vilifying us. Um, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, certainly like once you get post-Holocaust, then it's a different story. But I do wonder if there was some level of apprehension from, the most devout Jewish people prior. And again, like I don't have, enough of a, history background or the appropriate cultural background to really speak on that. But I do wonder if that's, maybe what he's trying to do here, where the Baudelaires, being the younger generation, is, struggling with this and having their elders, the people that they look up to, telling them, no, 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 you can't do those things.
I mean, the only thing that I can think is if this island is supposed to be representative of the Jewish people uh, getting the land of Israel it becoming their nation state,
Mm.
post World War II,
Right.
because there's
Yeah.
only a few years after World War II that it's saying, because like it's like everything comes back here or everything ends up here. That's the idea behind
Right.
Israel, right?
Yeah.
Uh, that all Jewish people are welcome there,
Hmm.
and but in order to create it, then you know what I mean. What happened with the Palestinian people? What continues to go on to this day? If it's saying just because we've been persecuted doesn't mean that we should persecute other people in order to create a safe space for us. If that's what this whole island thing is supposed to be representative of,
Mm.
perhaps is the struggle with Palestinians versus Israelis. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, that's a really interesting reading.
Because it's saying he's on the island, but we want a safe place, and there's no other safe place in the world. And definitely seems like there's reference to this. I forget exactly what the references are. I don't know if Kit has been there before. Is there a reference to that?
I believe so.
Yeah, so she's been there before.
Or
And
no, I don't believe that she's actually been there before, but she's spoken to people who have been there.
yeah, so that very much seems like Israel, right
Right.
before Jewish people. You know, I say it's so tough when you're talking about Middle Eastern politics, but to say reacquired Israel, even though it had been thousands of years, right?
Right.
So I feel like it's safe to say, but not in modern history. It's not like they had it, and then they lost it for a few decades and then reacquired it. But the fact that they reacquired their homeland of Israel, that there were people there, and that's a mutiny to say you have to be just like us. And it's like, well, we don't want to be Muslim, and we're not, going to be like the Palestinians. We are Jewish, and it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
That like, but it, so you can't just force them out. You have to what? Live with them, accommodate. Um, is
Right.
that what's going on here? Because like certainly like because Kit saying I've never been there, but I know people who have. It's I've never been to Israel, but I know family members who've been to Israel, who've been to the
Yeah.
Holy Land, et cetera, et
And
cetera.
yeah, and even, the idea that you have to make a pilgrimage there at least
Right,
once in your life.
right,
Um, and that, everything winds up here, at
exactly.
one point. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Is I think that this is supposed to be post-Holocaust inception of the modern state of Israel, and then forming this nation state. How can we do this in a way that doesn't make us villainous or treacherous?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting stuff that happens to be going on in this final book of the series.
yeah. I'm like I say, I'm definitely interested. He's really doing interesting stuff here. I continue to be like, I don't know how earned this is
Right.
because it's really good.
Yeah.
So I'm going, so much of it has felt just haphazard and random and without intent and without a plan. And he's stalling for time and he doesn't really have much to add. You know what I mean? There's been so many instances of this, and then going, wait, it was all leading to this. And I'm going, I, I'm dubious that that was the intent. Um, but at least on its own, it's functioning pretty well right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we will, continue on with chapters 9 to 13 for next week. Be sure to, read those chapters so that you can follow along. And yeah, I think that's about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, folks. Well, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Ignore the tattoo! A phrase here which means like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast across the web. That may seem like a strange definition, but in this context, it is entirely accurate.